And 5, 4. All right. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, BSides Nashville. My name is Jeff Mann. I am a security evangelist, strategist, product manager, a few other things. They give me new titles at Tenable Network Security every month or so. I'm here today to talk about the art of the Jedi mind trick, and hopefully you're here because you want to know what that means. This is my information in case you want to get in touch with me, and that's what I used to look like in my younger days. Just to let you know, I was cool once. Not that I'm not cool now, but you be the judge. What we're going to talk about today is, first of all, I want to just qualify why would I think I'm a Jedi, give you a little bit of my background, kind of talk very briefly about what's going on in security today, information security, cyber security, whatever you want to call it. Give you some impressions or some of my ideas about what I think is missing, what we could be doing better as a community. I have to credit Jason. He kind of set me up pretty well this morning. Sort of gave half my talk, really. So if you liked what Jason had to say, hopefully this will be an expansion. Talk about what we can do in terms of next steps. Hopefully we'll have some time for some discussion at the end. So, what makes me a Jedi? And let me start first by asking, does everybody know what it means, the idea of the Jedi mind trick, or does anybody not know what it means? We have some younger people in the audience. Who wants? Why don't we tell it? So, anybody seen any version of the movie Star Wars? The reboot? Any of the older ones? The idea of the Jedi mind trick is a scene in the original, which is episode 4, which is a whole other discussion, where one of the Jedi masters is trying to get somewhere, and they have to get past some guards or stormtroopers, and they just kind of do a little hand wave and say, "These are not the droids you're looking for," and so they're able to get past. So the idea of the Jedi mind trick is you're putting what you want people to do, what decision you want them to make, kind of planting that seed in their head. Not necessarily with magic, but with techniques and tricks of the trade. So anyway, the art of the Jedi mind trick. A long time ago, I began my career 33 some odd years ago working for the DoD. I was there for about 12 years. I'm actually classically trained as a cryptanalyst, became an information security analyst. We called it information security back in those days. Was in sort of at the beginnings of this whole internet security, pen testing, ethical hacking, red teaming, blue teaming thing 20 some odd years ago, and was developing methodologies and pen testing and doing it for the government. But decided it would be a whole lot more fun to do it in the private sector. So about 20 years ago, I came out into the commercial world and started out again doing pen testing, which was really vulnerability assessment. And back in those days, it was trying to convince companies, look, if you're going to be on the internet, you really need to have a firewall, and you need to have a this, and you need to have a that, and you need to have a program and a plan. Somewhere along the lines, I fell into PCI. Anybody out there happen to be PCI, QSA? We have one, we have two. ISA, close enough. And there's another one there. I call it PCI Purgatory. I ended up being there for 10 years. And Tenable actually saved me. They hired me about 2.5 years ago to be a PCI subject matter expert to help Tenable products and solutions be able to market it better, sell it better, solve the problems better in the PCI community. And my biggest challenge is actually trying to get my message about PCI and security sometimes to my own company, but that's a different story. True confession, this is where I used to work. I have a standing offer if anybody wants to ask me about my opinion of Snowden. You're welcome to do so tonight. I don't know if the beer is all free tonight, but buy me a beer, buy me a drink, and I will answer your questions about what I think about that agency and what they're doing with Snowden and the whole idea of privacy today. That's my teaser to come to the party later. When I started out in cryptography, almost 30 years ago now. Gosh, it has been 30 years. I really am old. I did manual cryptanalysis, manual cryptography, the old paper systems, the things that you see in museums today, the things you see in old movies. But the most secure form of encryption that exists in the world cannot be broken is a one-time pad, and that's what's up there in the corner. As long as you use it correctly. As long as you only use it once. As long as you keep the key protected and private and secure. It cannot be broken. Should be a familiar theme to you in terms of cryptography even today. Encryption systems today, of course, are computerized, and you get into the bits and bytes and the randomness of thousands and millions and billions and zillions of combinations. Nobody breaks crypto these days. You steal the key, you gain access to the key, you find backdoors, and of course, in terms of cryptography, there's two ends to it. There's an end where there's whatever you're trying to protect and encrypt that has to be encrypted, and sooner or later it's got to be decrypted. And, those are the weak spots. Those are where you want to target your attack. Don't try to break stuff in the middle. Anyway, does anybody recognize this? This is going to be audience participation today. What's the movie? Anybody? Imitation Game. Very good. Anybody know what that thing is that they're looking at? Make it easier for you. So to put things in context, when I started working for the NSA back in the mid-1980s, it was still a secret that the US and the UK and allies knew how to break that. Why would you think that is? Anyone? Yes, sir. Close? Yep. The answer, quite frankly, or quite simply, is there were still countries that were using it in the mid-'80s, thinking that they had secure communications. It wasn't revealed that we knew how to break that system. I want to say it was in the late 80s. Anyway, that's how old I am. My career in the private sector, as I said, I've done a lot of pen testing, vulnerability assessments, or security architecture work. Basically, I've gone into companies and tried to help them be more secure as an advisor, as a consultant. It's been a little bit of a culture shock for me actually working for a vendor for the last couple of years, because I've spent most of my career, what's a polite way to say it in mixed company, having less than positive things to say about vendors. In fact, I used to have the attitude, and I still kind of do, vendors lie. They're trying to sell you something. The harsh reality of this industry oftentimes is companies don't have access to security experts, to consultants, to advisors. They turn to the vendors. And of course, the vendors magically say, what you need is what I happen to be selling. Tenable being the exception because I happen to believe in our products, and I think what our products do are actually very helpful and provide a lot of useful information. And that's the closest thing to a product pitch I'll give you today. Tenable has me going around doing talks like this, being sort of a company spokesperson, a thought leader, a security evangelist, really trying to share and give back to the community. That's something that's important to Tenable. The founders really believe that we're in this together. This is a community, and there's this large problem that has to be solved. So people like me go out and give talks about security. And in the last year and a half, as I've been going out giving these talks to security, and I've been to lots of different talks, lots of different conferences and events, and not just security conferences, other industry conferences, I started noticing, and this is sort of what the formulation of this talk is, a lot of smart people, a lot of people giving talks about all the bad things that are going on in security, have lots of great information to share. But at the same time, and this is even dated a little bit, there's been a lot of really nasty breaches going on that have made it to the press. And as a seasoned veteran security professional, I've been doing soul searching and asking myself, why is this? Why are we still having these major breaches, large companies that should know better, companies that you're shocked to find, well, maybe not with the government so much, but companies that are, you'd think know better. You'd think that they have their act together and these breaches wouldn't happen. And one of the conclusions that I came to is, especially going to all these conferences, hearing all these talks about really smart people talking about how stupid these people are. You know, Jason was picking on the network guys this morning. You know, network guys, the IT guys, the admins, developers, everybody seems to have somebody to point to, management, and say, oh, you know, they just don't understand it like I do. And my thought was, and I'm going to continue to sound like a copycat from Jason, darn him, or us seasoned veterans are onto something and you should pay attention and listen. You know, if you're not getting, if you see a problem, if you understand things are wrong and you're not getting that point across, if people aren't hearing you, people like your customers, if you're a consultant, or within your own company, if you're an admin or an IT or a security guy, you know, you might be the problem. And where I'm going with this talk today is, you know, I've spent 20 years being a consultant going into companies, lots of different environments, lots of different adversarial, hostile situations, especially being a QSA. Nobody wanted to see the QSA guy come in. Are you with me, QSAs out there, PCI guys? You know, they want to get back to their day jobs. They don't, you know, security, audits, PCI, you know, what's this got to do with what I have to do? How do we make this go away? So I've had to prove myself. I've had to win the right to be heard. I've had to learn to read situations. And it occurred to me, you know, there's probably really smart people, probably academics that have figured out long ago names for all the techniques that I just have kind of picked up on over the years. But I still think it would probably be useful to share with others, as these are ways that you can try to help to learn how to be a better communicator. Jason touched on some of them this morning. I'm hoping that I can expand on that a little bit. But to me, we're starting with a fundamental problem. And I sometimes think it's that we've got too much technology in play in this business. And this is, again, pop quiz. Anyone know this movie? We have a lot of oldsters. Go ahead, shout it out. Very good. Technology is here to stay. Technology is not going away. But again, because there's so many companies out there, so many institutions, organizations that don't have security professionals on staff, don't see the need to hire them as consultants, what ends up happening is everybody falls down on the technology. You know, we got to buy something that's going to fix our problem. I give another talk where I talk about, you know, sort of one of the buzzwords in the industries is there's no such thing as, buzz phrases, there's no such thing as a silver bullet. There is no one technology that you can put in place that's going to solve all your problems and make security go away, or the worries about it go away. But the reality is, most companies are out there, they've filled whole magazines full of silver bullets. No, there is no single silver bullet. You've got to invest in sometimes dozens of different solutions. I heard a talk last week where somebody had a slide that kind of depicted it, and, you know, it just started populating and filling up, and it just kept filling up and filling up with all the different technologies, IT technologies, security technologies that have to be in place these days to make your network secure. So, there's too much of a reliance on technology. And as security professionals, I've been thinking, you know, we've got to try something different. We've got to do something different. We've got to change the rules. That's my clue. Anybody know what the movie is? Which? Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan. The idea being, in this movie, it's sort of a running thing throughout the movie, Captain Kirk, and by the way, I'm a Trekkie, even though this is sort of a Star Wars themed talk. I'm much more of a Trekkie. Judge me if you will. But the notion in this movie is Captain Kirk is people talk about him as being the only cadet at Starfleet Academy that ever beat one of their final exams, which was a test called the Kobayashi Maru. And the idea of the test was simply, how do you react to an unwinnable situation? So the whole, you know, it's sort of a role play. They're acting out a situation where the ship that you're in charge of is about to be destroyed and all hands on deck are going to be lost. You know, hundreds of people, and it's on you, the commander. how do you react to it? And the theme in the movie is that Captain Kirk was the only person that ever beat the system. And at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, maybe I shouldn't because there's young people here that might want to see the movie. At the end of the movie, he reveals how he beat the test, and I'll leave it at that for now. But essentially, he changed the rules. He changed the playing field in a clever way that people in this community might relate to. Let's say that. But I think this meme was out a couple months ago on Twitter's, and I saw it, and I think this kind of encapsulates one of the big problems that I've seen that I think Jason kind of attested to this morning. And that is sometimes we in this community have a little bit of an ego. Sometimes we think we're a little bit smarter than everybody else, and we place the blame elsewhere. And again, I would suggest maybe we're as equally to blame if we're failing at communicating and getting the message across. If we see the problem and we can't communicate the solution, maybe we need to try something different. So, what can we do different? What can we do better? And this is all about communication techniques. This is how to become a better persuasive speaker, someone that can get your point across and get decisions made when other people have to make those decisions. So, one of the first things that I learned how to do as a consultant is, and there's many different ways of doing this, is to, if you're going to be going into a company, if you're going to be, meeting with your bosses, whatever the audience is, do something to try to get to know them a little bit. This is a lot easier these days with Google and all the social media. You can stalk people and learn quite a bit about them. But, something that I might do is just simply ask, and we'll do it now, in terms of, let's try to get a feel for what the group is like. Who thinks the best hacker movie ever made is Black Hat? Never have I had anybody raise their hand for that. Good thing. How about War Games? Few hands. How about Sneakers? A couple. Hackers? One. Angelina Jolie fan, huh? Sorry about that. Oh, that was very bad. Firewall. Has anybody ever even heard of or seen this movie as a hacker movie? Swordfish. I picked out movies that I've seen over the years that had some sort of not so much accuracy in terminology, but maybe more the methodology. How about Enemy of the State? One there. I like that one just because it's about where I used to work. There's a scene in Enemy of the State where the bad guy, who's like a deputy director for NSA, who I actually, that position exists and I used to work for them. They're coming to work in this big stretch limousine, all mysterious and dark. The windows are darkened, and they're driving down this ramp into one of our pretty glass-encased buildings where you can't see inside. And I've always chuckled because, that's real. That ramp does exist. It's the loading dock where they bring in the food for the cafeteria primarily. Nobody goes in that way. Somebody was suggesting that maybe I need to update this. How do we reach the younger crowd today? So I've been working on, thinking of how do we update this slide. So let's just cut to the chase. Is that the best hacker thing out there these days? Okay. And what is it? Mr. Robot. I am robot related. You're thinking iRobot. Yes. It's always fun when you're like, hey, they're speaking my language. Pay attention. So, again, Jason touched on this morning. One of the key factors of effective communication when you're trying to educate or teach is to start by listening. And that serves multiple purposes. One is you want to get to know your audience and sort of get a frame of reference. I think Jason talked about finding a common reference point, and that's one way you can do it. I actually think you sometimes, and maybe often, need to take that a little bit further and not only find common ground or common playing field or things that you both know about, which is legitimate, but sometimes I think you need to go beyond that and actually enter their world, find out what their frame of reference is, what their common ground is, and go to them. And you can do this by listening. Hear what they're talking about. I used to do it, and Jason mentioned it too, darn him. But, if you're a consultant and you're going into a company, or even if you're within your company going to your boss's office, look around, see what they've got on their desks, see what kind of posters they have up, what pictures they have. In the early days, I used to go walking around offices and see what Dilbert cartoons were posted in cubicles. That gives you a really good clue as to what corporate culture is like when you find out what people think are the funny Dilbert cartoons. Later on, it was there was a movie called Office Space. Anybody seen that one? The favorite Dilbert cartoon transitioned to what's your favorite scene of the movie Office Space. But listening gives you the ability to start feeling out what people are into, so you can kind of keep it in the back of your mind. Oh, this person's a big hockey fan. Oh, this person's a big football fan. Or, oh, this person probably doesn't like sports at all, but they're into cars. So, and that gives you the responsibility to learn, expand a little bit, learn about something else, so that when you're trying to explain what you're trying to explain it to, you can try to put it into terms they understand, using analogies, using stories, trying to use the language that they're familiar with. For example, and I'll apologize because I'm not going to reach the whole audience. Is anybody a football fan out there? A few people. If you're on defense and you're trying to chase down a running back on the other team that's turning the corner and heading down the field, and you're, say, the middle linebacker, if you turn and try to go straight to where the person is, by the time you get there, he's way downfield. So you have to actually turn and pick a point downfield where I'm going to try to intercept him. Because by the time you get there, he gets there, hopefully, and you'll catch up to him. That's a great analogy if people know football. If you don't know football, nobody knows what I just said. It's not technically a movie, but has everybody seen that commercial? I want to say it's an insurance commercial, where there are guys on the phone asking the operator, the support guy, you guys have frog protection, right? And the guy's saying, yeah, fraud protection. We have that. You mean frog protection? Yeah, fraud protection. Okay, we're speaking the same language. I totally get what you're saying. They were in agreement. So make sure that, when you have an audience, when you're trying to get your point across, I think it's important to speak their language. A lot of times in a business, the language is going to be a business context, which means talking about money, talking about the drivers, talking about the investments, talking about how this is going to help our bottom line, or your bottom line if it's a third party. Something that I learned early on is to not just say things once and assume that they get it and move on. Sometimes you need to, regroup and try a different tact. You have to be consistent, persistent. You have to keep trying, and not become impatient, and not become, and Jason sort of referred to this, not become a jerk by like, you're stupid, you're not getting it. Let me find somebody else to talk to. Doesn't play too well. Again, if you're listening, if you're learning about the audience, the people that you're talking to or person that you're talking to, hopefully that gives you an idea to how to tell stories, to tell analogies. Put it in terms that they understand. I've even been to talks where people talk about the need to communicate better and to dumb it down, or to talk non-tech to the non-technical crowd. And then they proceed to give, in my opinion, an extremely technical talk. But they think that they've dumbed it down. They think that they're speaking in non-technical terms. And if you looked around in the audience and saw some of the non-techies, they're still going over their head. So tell stories. Put it in terms that they understand. Learn to speak their language. I mentioned I was a crippy. So, I have the occasion to talk about cryptography and encryption, especially in the PCI world, where you're supposed to be encrypting card data at rest, and now it's become popular to encrypt it from the swipe device, from the cash register point of sale, and people are wanting to talk about all these fancy terms of, algorithms and bit size and elliptic curves, this, that, and the other. And I'll tell you, most retailers, most companies, merchants that have to do PCI, they don't know the first thing about cryptography. So I just try to break it down into really, really simple terms. You've got something that you want to protect, that I call readable text, and you're going to do some really complicated math stuff. So that's represented just by a plus sign, because you're adding something. And you're using a variable, which we call key, which is the secret random stuff, and that produces something you can't read. I had this slide in the talk probably about a year ago. Somebody walked up to me afterwards and said, I just took the CISSP exam, and you explained more about cryptography than I ever understood in my whole training session. Just by having, and this was the slide I used. So, this is sometimes hard for techies to break it down into simple terms. I oftentimes will catch myself when I'm trying to break things down into simple terms thinking, wow, I'm technically getting it wrong here. I can pick apart the logic of what I'm saying, but I'm still speaking in broad terms that I think will get the point across, and hopefully they're going to pick up on what I mean. I just hope they don't nail me on the details. But sometimes you have to do that to speak to non-technical audiences and get them to a point of understanding. I already gave away the movie. Anybody know what this one is? I talked about it earlier. The Office Space. Sweet. I'm going to steal it from you. Does anybody know who this guy is? What his claim to fame was from the movie in Office Space? What his tagline? No, that's not the basement guy. He's a people person. He's a communicator. His job was to take the specs from the customer to the engineers. That was it. That's right. He created the jump to conclusions guy. So, again, if you're a people person, if you're a communicator, that means you got to engage the people, listen to them, learn a little bit about them, find different ways, don't give up. Darn it, Jason had this one in there too. This movie is usually a stumper for most people. Anybody? It's a Christmas movie. Sort of. All right, I'll give up. I'm sorry? Yeah, I think you're onto something. The Long Kiss Goodnight, very good. So Samuel L. Jackson in the movie Long Kiss Goodnight has a line where he says, "Don't make an assumption." We're in mixed company again, because you always make an ASS out of you and umption. So, boy, I found this to be true in my years of consulting, because I think I've done a great job explaining something, and I learned a trick a long time ago. I will stop and say, "What did you just hear me say?" Communicate back to me what I've just tried to communicate to you. And 9 times out of 10, I've blown it because they're not on the same page. Which means I got to try again. I got to try a different story. I got to try a different tactic. I got to try to find different common ground.
So a lot of times, Jedi, we like to put that on them, right? It's their fault because they didn't get it, right?
Right.
It's on us because we didn't get it.
Exactly. And again, Jason had a slide towards the end where he was talking about, somebody abusing him. It wasn't his fault. It was their fault. It's sort of the same principle, but flip it. If somebody's not understanding you, it may not be their fault. It could very possibly be your fault. That's a great point. I mean, I literally used to practice at the dinner table. If I could get my kids or my wife, who's not a technical person, to understand whatever I was trying to get point I was trying to get across the current customer, I'd run it by the family dinner table. And if they got to a point where they were understanding, then I thought I was onto something. Okay, maybe this is where I need to go. My wife is great at coming up with analogies, so I stole from her all the time. A non-technical example of this, of how how we fail to communicate at times. Have you ever done this, or have you ever seen somebody trying to communicate with someone that's deaf or someone that speaks a foreign language? What do we tend to do as humans? We speak loudly and we speak slowly. Does it work? No. You can speak as loud and as slowly as you want to me in just about any other language. I'm not going to understand a word you're saying because I'm an ugly American and I only speak English. Darn if Jason didn't mention this one again too. This was especially true when I would be doing an assessment and have to go in and present the results. Jason talked about, don't just crush them with, this is what's bad, and it's very true. You need to kind of work up to it. And the lesson that I learned many years ago, and it's easy to pick this movie out because the title's right there. Start with something positive. My life lesson was actually, my father taught this to me, and I'm scarred to this day because of it. I never got straight A's as a kid. I was one of those smart kids that was too bored to actually submit all the homework and all that kind of stuff. But one time I was trying to get straight A's, and as close as I ever got was like 6 A's and a B. So I brought home my report card, showed it to my dad, and first thing out of his mouth was, "Why'd you get a B?" And that's haunted me to this day. So, I would go into clients and try to start with, this is just a made-up scenario. Your website that we were attacking. The layout is nice, the color schemes are nice, it's very pretty. But, and then you just ease into some of the things that are wrong. It's not so good that, we found some programming areas, cross-site scripting, SQL injection or whatever. And my gosh, we were doing SQL injection 20 years ago before we even had a name for it. And then you get into the really ugly things like, you were using default out-of-the-box, programming components, pieces to the website, and there's all sorts of default settings, and we found a null password, and it was all over. Ease into it. You're more likely to get them on board with where you're going because, the message is you need to start over from scratch, you need to do something different, you need to provide training. Usually it's going to cost money, which is what our customers, your bosses, that's the bottom line for them usually is how much is it going to cost me? So, this is not exhaustive. These are just some of the techniques that I've picked up over the years that I thought, I've always felt like I've been fairly good at developing a rapport with my customers. So these are some of the things that I thought that these are some of the things that maybe I should be sharing to others. Especially in sort of the hacker security community. We have a reputation sometimes, and I think it was why we had such an entertaining keynote this morning, of not being people persons. Of not being easy to get along with, of being a little bit egotistical, being a little bit jerky sometimes, because we know more than everybody else. There's a guy here that's speaking this afternoon. I've heard him refer to the non-technicals as muggles. That's funny, unless you're the muggle and you know what he's getting at. So anyway, what do we need to do differently? Movie? The Matrix. Sometimes it might seem so overwhelming that, I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I take the blue pill? My encouragement to you is, dive into this. Try to think about how to communicate more effectively. Don't give up, because when you know it all, when you've taken the red pill, it really is pretty ugly. And security is so complex. And there's so many levels and so many facets and so many things that have to be done. And so many people have to know things. It can be overwhelming. I'm overwhelmed. I've been doing it for 33 years. One of the talks that I go around and give is basically, I've been doing this for 33 years and nothing's changed. Technology's a lot faster. Things are moving a lot faster. We've got, new things to worry about, like the cloud and mobile. Cloud's not new, really. All these little computers that are just, do you have any idea how powerful this thing is? It's crazy. If you're an old person. So anyway, sometimes you might want to think about giving up. I'm encouraging you not to. I've heard people give talks And in fact, I think it was in Jason's talk again, referring to this whole thing as a game. As an analyst, as a cryptanalyst first and as an information security analyst, I've been trained to consider everything a puzzle. When you think of things as a puzzle, you're trying to solve something. You're trying to come to a solution. And many times there's more than one solution. There isn't just one absolute way to do it. So, try something and fail, try something different. And I'm not just talking about the technical problems that you're trying to solve, but I'm talking also about getting your message across to others. Treat it as a puzzle to be solved. How can I get this accomplished? How can I get to the goal where they're understanding what they, and hopefully acting and responding the way I think that they need to act and respond. Again, in terms of the ego, building a trust relationship, building a rapport. Jason stole my analogy again. As a consultant, he's done it and I've done it. I used to go in, and especially with PCI, I used to come in and say, look, where are your problems? I know you know your network better than I do. You know what the problems are. You know what you've been trying to get your bosses to invest in, whether it's technology, training, resources, more people. I'm your best friend right now. You don't know that, but because I can put a label of PCI on it, guess what? You'll get it. And boy, they were really happy when I slapped PCI on something and they started getting things. Building trust relationships. That helps the end game, which is to make the company more secure. It's also very important to note, and hopefully most of us understand this, but security is not really a state. It's not like, okay, we're going to get to the top of the mountain and we're done. Security is a process. It's a lifestyle. This is something you do. I mean, if you're, if you know what you're doing with security, you know you're never done. You know that you always have to be diligent. I like to refer to it as, people talk about being paranoid, and the best security people are necessarily paranoid, but I think you need to be appropriately paranoid. You can, any of us can go too far overboard on it. Patch what you can, plug what you can, know that there's holes out there that you can't plug, keep your eyes on them. That's my way of breaking it down. Yes, sir. Yep.
Maybe everyone in this room agrees with that point, but when you're trying to make a point about security to your management, your engineers, your associates, the people that you come in contact with, you're talking about security, they may not realize that you understand it, that they think that you think the end-all be-all is perfect security.
Right.
They don't get that you have their best interest at heart. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. We have a perception problem as a community. Part of it is, you've got that aura and mystique of being a hacker that, you just do magical stuff and you break things and you get root and admin access and if you do that kind of stuff, if you're a pen tester, 9 times out of 10, you just know more about what the stuff is and how it works and what the back doors are and what the weaknesses are, and oftentimes it's a feature, really. And you just know more than somebody else. It's not really that magical when you know what it's all about. But yeah, there's a perception problem, and that's part of the communicating. That's part of the trust relationship, making it a partnership, being as paranoid as you need to be, being as secure as you need to be. Harsh reality, we're not in the security business. We're in the risk business. There was an article, I'm not going to remember the details, but there was a lawsuit that was filed a couple months ago against a penetration testing company that did forensics as well, because a company hired them to do forensics work, and they didn't find the root cause fundamental problem that was causing this company to be compromised, and of course it came back later to bite them, and so the company was angry and tried to sue the pen testing forensic company. The lawsuit probably, I don't know what the current state is, but it's not going to go anywhere because there's fine print in the contracts and the agreements with this company and most security companies that, if you're a pen testing company, you're not guaranteeing you're finding all the problems. If you're any kind of security technology consultant, whatever, if you have a good SLA, service level agreement, you've got disclaimers in there saying, there's no guarantee that we're finding everything. We're good. We're going to find a lot of stuff. We're going to try to plug the big holes, but no guarantees. And that's sort of one of the realities of this industry, especially from the consulting perspective. Companies don't always like to hear that when they get breached again. But that's a perception issue. So, anybody know what that movie is? War Games. So the moral life lesson of war games is, and this is in terms of the nuclear arms race, the political message is, does anybody remember what game it was that they were playing? Tic-tac-toe. Well, global thermonuclear war. But it was really a game of tic-tac-toe that they used to teach the computer that tic-tac-toe, if both sides know what they're doing, nobody ever wins. So the only logical solution is not to play. But again, we talk about it being a game very often in the industry. I like to think of it as a puzzle. You may know what this movie is. This is my most recently added slide. It's not Sixth Sense. Yes. It wasn't a great movie. He does adopt him at the end, I think. Yeah, so the movie is called Mercury Rising, and the premise is NSA has designed this super secret code, but to test it, they take out ads in magazines and they put puzzles in the back of the magazines, and the puzzle is encrypted with their super, unbreakable form of encryption. And if you happen to be able to break the puzzle, you get if you solve this, congratulations, please call this 800 number. And they have a bunch of them out there. So the guys at NSA, one day all of a sudden the phone rings because it's never rung before because it's not supposed to be a breakable code. But this kid who's autistic, and it's a real cheesy movie because he just looks at it and it blurs and becomes the message. And it's just magical because that's how hackers are and crypto guys are. But I put this slide in because, the way I literally got a job at NSA 30 years ago was I took a battery of tests that were basically a bunch of puzzles. And it wasn't, could you solve them, but it was like, how well do you do at solving them? One of the tests was, I hope this isn't secret information, I'll get in trouble, but it was like looking at a geographic shape. They would have a two-dimensional shape on the page, and they'd say, what does this geographical shape look like from above or from behind? And then you had 4 options. I guess I was good at that. I don't know if people struggle with that, but, like a pyramid. What's a pyramid look like from straight down looking at it? It's a square. Right. Anyway, I threw that in there just because I happen to like puzzles, and that made me good at being an analyst that got me into NSA and got me into this career. Because people will come up to me and ask me, how do you get into it? I also, when I first started, when we didn't have computers when I started, but we pretty soon got IBM XTs, ATs, and then we got a hard drive on it. Whoo, 10 megabit hard drive. How are we ever going to fill that thing? This is before Windows, young people. Yep. And then we got into Unix workstations. The first networks were Unix-based, and there was this stupid game that came with all the Unix Solaris. There was Quest, but I got addicted to Spider Solitaire. Still play it to this day. And I always will replay it until I beat it. And I maybe once a year I'll give up and not, but I'll spend weeks sometimes trying to solve a stupid thing. I'm not saying I'm proud of that. I'm just, that's my addictive personality. None of that runs in this community. So final thoughts, wrapping this up. Understand you're trying to change culture many times. And movie? Titanic. Titanic would have done a whole lot better if it had a bigger rudder and could have steered more quickly. But, that's a pretty common analogy, trying to steer the Titanic. Trying to change something is like trying to steer the Titanic. And it's very true, not only within the companies that we work for or our customers, but I think in terms of our community itself. Trying to think things through differently, trying a different approach takes a while. So, somebody asked me at a talk, well, what do you do? I said, well, if you see the need, you're the one that's going to probably be the one to do something. So lead by example. Be the one that's humble. Be the one that tries to communicate. Be the one that reaches across the aisle to the other organization. Jason was talking about, I guess he has a special fondness in his heart for networking guys, but as a QSA, I would have to go into companies and the first section is all about the networking, so I'd have to talk to the network guys, and then the next section is all about servers, so I'd have to talk to, first the Unix, Linux guys, then the Windows guys, and of course they don't get along. And then I'd have to talk to people about the encryption, and that was usually talking to the apps people. And if data is being stored, it's probably stored in a database. And then I had to start talking to the DBAs. And, very often I'd talk about, I'd start with the network guys and say, well, where's all the sensitive data? Where are the servers that have all the credit card information? They're like, I don't know. My job is to just keep the blinky lights green, keep the network up. And I'd talk to the server guys. Well, where's, what kind of apps are running on these servers? Where's the data flowing? They're like, I don't know. My job's the OS. Even the DBAs, you'd talk to them, give me the schemas for the database. Where's all the sensitive information stored? Like, I don't know, I just make it this wide and this deep, and they don't care. So sometimes we do it to ourselves. There's stovepipes, there's silos, there's isolation. People don't talk to each other. I very literally very often would walk away from the company knowing more about their overall operations, data flows, business processes than any one person I talk to. There's a few old timers in the room. The exception would be there'd be some guy that started at the company 30 years ago in the mailroom and became a mainframe programmer and knew COBOL, and they hired him back at Y2K. This has an ancient history for some of the young people in the room. And he's the one that knew how everything worked and knew where everything was and knew what all the systems were. But those guys are going away. Those guys are fading. I've talked very often in terms of how I've been successful as a consultant is I describe myself as being bilingual. I can speak tech. I can speak non-tech. I think it's important to be able to speak the language of the people that you're talking to. That helps to earn the trust. That helps to build the bridges. That helps to, with the respect thing. Techies don't tend to like to talk to auditors. So sometimes I've had to prove myself. I had to explain to one guy that was like ex-Air Force, CISO, ran a SOC at a retail merchant like it was the DoD. And, does anybody here remember client server in terms of applications, the concept? It's a pretty simple concept. You have one server running an app and a lot of clients that are talking back and forth. It's a one-to-many relationship. They'd implemented a solution where the server they put out in 1,000 different stores listening, and the client was one or two clients that the admins used. And it was something that happened to be running Secure Shell and emulating Telnet. But because it had to run Telnet, that meant the Telnet daemon was running 1,000 times at 1,000 different stores because they had 1,000 servers instead of 1,000 clients. It took me 4 hours to convince him, you've implemented this backwards and you haven't solved your problem because you've still got Telnet out in all the stores. Once he finally got it, and he was the worst in terms of adversarial that I ever encountered and didn't want to give me the time of day. But he begrudgingly respected me. He's like, okay, you know a little bit about what you're talking about. But it took a long time. So anyway, sometimes you have to put yourself out there to gain the respect and earn the trust. But it's important to be able to speak multiple languages. And at this point in my career, I feel like I don't hack anymore. I don't pen test anymore. I know the concepts. I can still talk about it. But I'm much more interested in becoming a teacher, and I try to be a teacher and communicate. I will take the risk of offending the pen testers in the room and say, breaking things is a whole lot easier than trying to create something that can't be broken. And even harder is to talk to the people that have no clue about anything that you're talking about. They're just trying to run the business and trying to convince them or explain to them why this all matters and why they should care and to what degree that they should care. That's kind of it. We're doing well time-wise. We can talk for about 5 or 10 minutes. Questions? Yes, sir.
I had a comment about getting to know your fellow employees.
Mm-hmm.
We had a government bureaucrat that had to sign our documents to bring in custom equipment into our building.
Mm-hmm.
And he would take 15 minutes to sign the simple form and enter it in his computer 1 button at a time and stamp it with a stamp. And he was always grumpy, hated his job, very, very slow. But I found out that he was an avid bowling enthusiast and watched all the bowling tournaments. So it was my turn to go take the paperwork in. I dreaded it because I knew it was going to be a 30-minute chunk of time out of my day. But before I went in, I searched to see who won the bowling tournaments that day. I walked in and said, "What do you think of Bill Parker's win on that game?" "Oh, that was great." And he goes, "Stamp, stamp, sign, sign, click, click."
Done.
That was it. 1 minute.
Which is a good illustration about how a lot of what I'm talking about can be construed as really a form of social engineering. That is the art of the Jedi mind trick at its core. But again, sometimes you need to go beyond the social engineering aspect and go to a different plane, which is that level of understanding and entering into their world. Other questions, comments? Yes. I think I repeat it here in a minute. If you're interested, we can keep talking. If you're interested, I'm actually going to be teaching a workshop training course where I'm going to, at Circle CityCon, which is in June, trying to give the students, hopefully you'll sign up, an opportunity to put this into practice, practical exercise. Because I think a lot of us sometimes don't get the opportunity to speak, whether it's in a group setting, whether it's public speaking. I mean, BSides is great because it gives people an opportunity to speak in a public forum. I've had people suggest Toastmasters. I don't know if there's Toastmasters in your area, which is essentially a little club where you talk. You give talks and have fun with it. That's my contact info. And that's what I look like today. In fact, I'm wearing the same shirt. That's pretty embarrassing. Other questions, comments? Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
This was even before I was in security when I was still on the IT side. We were a liaison, we were the people person. Between developers, DBAs, users, we did a lot of that ourselves. I kind of like a lot of positions out there. But first week, all these new hires would just sit with different parts of the business, IT, users, just watch how people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm to the point where, then later on, a year later, there may be decisions about something. I understand that this solution, this option is going to work. It's for the user. Before they even make that decision. So I find that helpful.
Yeah. I am convinced, there's always going to be the smart people, the technical people that figure out the hacks and take it to the next level. And of course, there's always new technology coming that needs to be broken. People need to figure that out. But at the end of the day, in the grand scheme of things, the only thing I've come up with that is a consistent fix, if you will, is understanding, training, awareness. Company-wide, it's, explaining to the lowest level secretary, admin person, why it matters what they do. and what their actions and inactions, how it impacts the overall operation. And that addresses the phishing campaigns, the spam emails and all that kind of stuff. If you can explain and educate people, and it's more than just, taking that 20 question online quiz once a year, change your password, make a strong password. It's really giving context and meaning and understanding, and helping companies to become aware of what the implications and the ramifications are of security. I used to have, especially the merchants in the PCI community, tell me all the time. I'd be explaining what it all meant and the background and the context, and they'd always say, "Yeah, but we sell women's clothing. We don't need DoD level security." Well, I'm sorry to say, but the rules have changed these days. The playing field has changed these days. What used to be, in terms of PCI, the belief that an attacker is going to go after the 20 million, 80 million cards that are stored in a database, and it's going to be a one-time penetration. They get in, they get out, and that's what you're protecting against. That's not how it works anymore. Those clever guys and gals have figured out how to harvest cards one at a time from 1,000 little mom and pop shops and harvest it in one place. And it might take a week or a month or 2 or 3, but they don't care because nobody's detecting them, because they're flying under the radar. So the paradigm has shifted. The rules have changed. Nobody ever thought that you would bother going after 1 or 2 cards or 10 cards from a small merchant, because you're not going to invest in that, because you don't get the bang for the buck. Well, unfortunately, the bang for the buck is now you can do that, and you can do it relatively unabated across dozens, if not hundreds, of small merchants. So the game has changed, and we need to change as well. I can try to. I don't know if I'll do it justice. Hackers for Charity is an organization that tries to raise money to provide technology and computer equipment, primarily in Africa, primarily in Uganda. Uganda is a country that's been war-torn for many decades. Gosh, I could spend a long time talking about it. There was a warlord that was operating in Uganda for many years. He's now finding safe harbor in South Sudan, I believe. Would go into villages that had no mass communication, would kill everybody, steal all the children, make the young boys become child soldiers, make the young women, the young girls, sometimes as young as kids that are in this room right now, sex slaves. And as that has pretty much been removed from Uganda, I mean, there's lots of orphans, there's lots of people trying to get rehabilitated. So this organization provides computing equipment, computer training, and trying to teach people how to fend for themselves and have some way of making a living. So Hackers for Charity, I don't know, on the back, I don't know if there's a website or not. I forget what's on it. There we go. The guy that founded it's hacker. I actually used to work with the guy many years ago, a guy named Johnny Long, and he pulled up stakes and actually lives over in Africa and kind of runs the shop over there. So he's kind of, walking the talk, if you will. Anyway, I think our time's up. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of BSides.